With the Earth in the grip of accelerating climate change caused by the effects of greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels, how can the new technologies of the fourth industrial revolution help? We will find answers to this question in the new UJ Cloudebate series, hosted by award-winning broadcaster Ashraf Garda. Our Cloudebate investigates how 4IR technologies assist in clean energy generation and battery storage. The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Good day to everyone who has joined us for today's Cloud Debate hosted by the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. We are streaming this event to YouTube, Facebook and Twitter and encourage you to participate in the discussion. At the end of the discussion, there will be an opportunity to win a 4IR tech hamper. There will be one for each platform. So be sure to stay tuned and answer the question at the very end of the discussion. Well, this year, a new UJ Cloud Debate series will tackle the hugely important topic of how the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, or 4IR tech, can be applied to positively impact the harmful effects of climate change. With the intense weather patterns we have been seeing around the globe in recent times, it is a top-of-mind concern and something which needs discussion and debate. And that is exactly what we will be doing this year. So over the 3 episodes, we will discuss clean energy and battery power, recycling and deforestation, and finally, weather and water.
The world is in the grip of accelerating climate change, caused mainly by the negative effects of greenhouse gas emissions such as carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, as well as uncontrolled waste and pollution. Burning fossil fuels such as coal and petrol for energy is a key cause of what's called a greenhouse effect. The increasing and uncontrolled release of gases into the atmosphere has a hothouse effect that causes the world's average temperatures to rise, which in turn causes climate change that can lead to floods, wildfires, and the melting of the planet's ice caps. All this can cause widespread harm and devastation, including death and the destruction of habitats, much of what we have been seeing lately. 4IR Tech can help. In his 2016 book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, describes his concept of a new technology revolution that fuses the physical, digital, and biological worlds, impacting all disciplines, economies, and industries, and even challenging the ideas about what it means to be human. Amongst the many benefits offered by the 4IR is the way in which new technologies can be applied to counter climate change. According to research from the Social Market Foundation, published in January 2020, some of the ways 4IR tech can assist include better monitoring of air quality, more personalized advice on air pollution, using technologies to remove pollution and carbon from the air, cleaning up transportation, using big data and blockchain-based solutions to encourage environmentally friendly decision-making by consumers and businesses. Decarbonizing industry. The intention of the UJ Cloud Debate series is to showcase the role of new technologies in improving our environment in an understandable and practical way. The discussion will help us to become more informed about real scientific facts and not be swayed by pseudoscience and misinformation. At UJ, we are also taking climate change seriously. 4,450 solar panels have been installed on the roofs of several on-campus buildings and carports since 2020. Through this project, the university is demonstrating its commitment to environmental sustainability by reducing the electricity demand on the national power grid. 2 electric buses have also been purchased, which will be used to transport students between campuses, another carbon emission saving for the university. The university is seeking projects that are innovative for both university operations and for research purposes. Installing solar power energy not only provides learning opportunities for our students, saves money by reducing the power bill, but is also a step towards achieving the country and the world's climate goals, as it also reduces the carbon emissions.
The University of Johannesburg is taking this issue very seriously. And I start off today's episode with Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University, Professor Chilidzi Marawala. Two things to consider. One is climate change, the other is a response to climate change, and perhaps the third one, the issue of 4IR in terms of that response. Now, UJ, we continue with the cloud debate by speaking to Professor Chilidzi Marawala. He's the Vice-Chancellor at UJ, but he's also someone that I would describe as a champion of 4IR. So, Prof. Marawala, great chatting to you, and thanks for your time.
No, thank you very much, Ashraf. It's always great to see you, and we are hoping to see you more at the University of Johannesburg.
Well, you know, your position is as champion, as I've already said, so every reason to see and to talk to you about what we're just doing, right? Perhaps just as a starting point, I mean, just your personal take on what I just said, you know, climate change and the problems and the threat to civilization. What's your take on that?
Well, it is an absolutely important issue that we all have to grapple with. The just transition is not just words. These are something that we have to do, and here at the University of Johannesburg we are doing something about it, whether it is in our classrooms, whether it is in our infrastructure, also the mindset of the people who work for us. Very, very important that we ensure that the planet is protected and that we do not leave a much destroyed planet. And in fact, we found it almost destroyed. So we really need to clean our act together.
How do we heal it? Yeah, we'll talk about the 4-hour aspect in a moment, but in terms of what you said, both for yourself and the entire university campus, right, or fraternity, is what you're doing around the consciousness around climate change and its impact, is what you're doing being forced upon as a reaction by, let's say, government or the United Nations with their, you know, sustainable development goals, or is it something that you've internalized yourself and said, hold it, we need to take action ourselves, we don't need someone else to even tell us that?
Well, it is something that we have internalized ourselves. You know, I grew up in the rural part of South Africa, where when we used to walk out of our houses, it was all green and lush. And now when I go back, and I was telling people, my father passed on, and I was walking people in my village, I said, this is not the village where I was born. Places which were forest, for example, are now completely populated, you know. So this is something that is very personal to me, and it is something that University of Johannesburg has adopted as one of its core principles.
Okay, well, that's so interesting, because often when we talk about things like climate change, I mean, there's a sense from people that it's very high level, and therefore not my problem, because people can't see it. So if I look at the example of COVID-19, you know, when it started and it's far away in China, it's like, that's not my problem. But within a few weeks, it becomes your problem, right? I mean, your example that you just given, and maybe others watching us would think along the same lines, that there is evidence, there's daily evidence of how the impact of climate change is affecting the entire planet and therefore affecting your space, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And we have done something about it. South Africa actually relies quite heavily on coal for its power. We just built Medupi and Kusile. These are coal power stations. It is inevitable that a responsible South Africa will have to make a just transition away from coal to renewables. What have we done about it at the University of Johannesburg? When I took over as Vice-Chancellor at the University of Johannesburg, our dependency on solar energy was close to 0%.
As a campus?
As a campus.
Yeah.
Now, as I speak, our dependency is 15% on solar energy. And you can imagine how much people are saying this is expensive technology. We are finding out that the infrastructure that we have put into place is able to pay itself up within 3 years. And the way we did it, we went to these open parking spaces and we make them have roofs, but the roofs are solar panels. You know. Very, very important initiative that we have made. And our goal is that in the next 2 years, we should raise that to 30%.
Well, that's fascinating. Now that brings me on to where 4IR fits in, because one of the things, and I think UJ has been at the forefront of this, besides internalizing climate change, to say, hold it, and I made the point, you're this 4IR champion, you've spoken a lot about it. How is UJ using itself as being at the vanguard of climate change, but using 4IR specifically in terms of providing the solutions for the future?
Well, I mean, the utilization of water. Firstly, we predict using artificial intelligence our water consumption. We monitor, because one of the things that one would easily face if you have a university as big as our university with approximately 60,000 staff and students, you know, is that your power consumption is very high, your water consumption is very high. So just behavioral changes and monitoring whether the lights are on or off. And if they are off, then that's good. You know, if they are on and nobody is in the room, then that is bad. Because artificial intelligence is actually the core. It's actually the most dominant technology of the fourth industrial revolution. Yes, you have blockchain, and there are many good things that we are doing there, but we are finding that artificial intelligence is much more touching many domains.
And why is that so?
No, it's simply because it's really embedding intelligence into machines. And intelligence is a driver of society, because if you want to make sense of anything, you need to process the data. And if you want to remind yourself to perform a certain action, you know, AI will be able to assist you to be able to do that. So it is a transformative technology that is multidisciplinary in terms of its applications.
Okay. Let's talk about alternatives. I mean, and especially in terms of the research that UJ is putting out and maybe implementation. So, you know, one thing is saying, you know, energy as we know it, you know, besides the problems of ESCOM, is like, okay, that's a problem, but we can't shut it down. Find the alternatives. We don't have alternatives. We need the economy to be ticking over. So in all situations, like, if this is not going to work, find me something better. What is better for you?
Well, I mean, I think the Comora Dam opportunity for hydropower is a lost opportunity. Of course, there are difficulties of getting you know, electricity from the Congo to South Africa because of the instability of the place and the distances. You know, I think we need to relook at hydropower. I think we need to. And this idea that people can generate their own electricity, I think it needs to be promoted and incentivized. There is no reason why we can't double the amount of solar panels in Johannesburg, for example. And you can imagine what is the impact on climate change that would have, you know. And then obviously we have issues of nuclear. What does it mean? We have Quebec. What does it mean? Is nuclear safer in terms of climate change? Those are some of the things that we need to start thinking about. The energy mix debate has to be settled.
I'm going to suggest that, you know, whereas all those things are great, that, I mean, and it's happening, there are alternatives that are being spoken about, but it's not at the level where it ought to be, considering that, you know, the issue of climate change and the impact of a destructed planet is not on pause while we're having this debate, right? You know, it's continuing. But there's possible pushback from other vested interests that wouldn't want UJ, for example, to move from 15% energy generation, self-generation, to 30%, because that means a less dependency on existing power supply.
Well, that is why you need leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership means pushing ahead. Because you believe in the truthfulness of whatever you are pursuing, despite the opposition, the extent of the opposition, the intensity of the opposition, and I think that's what we need to do. You know,
do we have leadership?
Well, I think it is lacking. I mean, it starts with individuals. What do you do when you see somebody littering on the street? You know, it starts with that. You know, what do you do when you realize that your neighbor is leaving the lights on during the day. You know, what do you do when you see water spillage in our streets? Do you keep quiet about it? Do you make noise? And if you make noise, obviously you are more likely going to change the situation than if you keep quiet. You know, so this requires leadership in all of us. So all of us must take leadership. Government must be held responsible. The private sector must be held responsible. Individuals must be held responsible. All of us must come together to tackle climate change. Now, I think anybody who does not take the issue of climate change seriously is short-sighted. I think is short-sighted, and I think is not being responsible. Because we are talking about maybe the greatest existential issue of our time. You know, we have to take this very, very seriously. And by the way, it's not only in the developed world. Even in the middle-income country like South Africa, you have people who are saying coal for the next 170 years. We have coal reserves for 173 years, you know. And I'm saying, no, we have to make a just transition. We have to make a just transition, you know. Of course, we have to make it responsibly, but it has to be made. For me, I think I need to emphasize this. Let us be responsible global citizens. Let us be responsible global citizens. And if we can be able to achieve that, problems of poverty, problems of growth, problems of climate change are going to be solved. It will just be a question of time. You know. Let us understand that we live in a connected world, and that nations are good, but misguided nationalism is bad.
Well, thank you for your time. It's been really enlightening, and I'm hoping that people watching us are going to make some serious notes, rewatch this thing, and then hopefully share it with other people, because it's that important.
Thank you very much.
Here we are, Professor Chelidze Marawala, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, a champion of 4IR, a champion of artificial intelligence, AI, and the point that he made, right, whether we think climate change, whether we think technology, 4IR, as well as artificial intelligence. I mean, just think about it yourself. You know, the problem is real, and to you, the question is, what are you going to do about that problem? So maybe I will internalize what I'd said earlier on about championing your purpose. How important is it for you that not just saving, but in making sure that the planet endures and thrives for decades and generations and thousands of years to come will happen because of the actions of someone like yourself? Right, we continue the cloud debate by trying to understand, moving away from South Africa and Africa, what's the global position on this. So with me, Professor Steve Thomas, who is the Emeritus Professor at the University of Greenwich. Prof. Thomas, appreciate your time, right? Yeah, let's talk about that. You know, big issues around, you know, existential crises for our planet, and then, you know, what's the way we respond to it. But what do you feel in terms of what are the global positions or the stands that have been taken?
The present always seems very uncertain, and there's a temptation for people to think that times are more uncertain than they have ever been. I mean, in today's sort of triple crisis of COVID, the invasion of Ukraine, and the problems with gas supply, does seem to be a very difficult set of problems, but maybe in hindsight, when we can see all the how it pans out, it won't seem such a difficult situation. It's hard to know, but it does seem a very difficult situation at the moment.
And having said that, I mean, your thoughts on the UN position, specifically around sustainable goals and making this one of the goals, goal 13, around climate change. Just amplify, if you can, what you think they're doing and what they ought to be doing.
It's up to every country to do what it can, and every country has a different set of circumstances, particularly with renewables. Every every country has its own resources, and there is no magic solution that you can apply from one country to another. So I think it's not up to the UN, it's up to the countries to take responsibility. I don't buy the idea that China and India are so big that if they're not doing things, we shouldn't be bothered because it won't make any difference. I think we have to set an example and not fall back on that lazy, we can't do anything because China emits so much gas.
Well, that's an interesting point you raise, because I mean, that has been the argument that highly industrialized nations appear to be reluctant to change and to embrace new projects and new ways to combat the impacts of climate change because of their concerns of the impact on their economies, right? So yes, I hear you are saying, we should do what we need to do. I get that. But how damaging, however, is it that some of the most industrialized nations, in fact, don't do so?
Well, it is very damaging, and there isn't much excuse because the cost of renewables has come down so steeply in the past few years that, I mean, in Britain, for example, renewables are the cheapest option if you want to generate electricity. Offshore wind is extremely cheap. I mean, it's way cheaper than gas or even coal at the moment, much less nuclear.
Well, that's interesting. How then? Let's look at the balance. The argument has always been, yes, do we tackle climate change? And notwithstanding what you've said about the UK being cheaper, for many other countries it's not the case. But for many others, it's tackling that versus the day-to-day existential crisis of just ensuring that countries are economically viable. Give me your thoughts on the balancing of the two.
Well, I think whilst every country has its own set of resources, I think the common factor for every country is that the priority has to be energy efficiency, because that has the double payoff of reducing emissions and reducing bills, and particularly at a time when energy bills are going through the roof. And for example, in Britain, as of today, energy bills are probably going to just about double. So, the payoff of energy efficiency, reducing demand, reducing reliance on imported fuels, and reducing emissions, it seems an overwhelming case.
What is your understanding about when we talk about energy efficiency? I mean, explain that, because at different levels it is understood differently by different people.
Well, energy efficiency, I mean, it's easiest to think about it in the household, and the households are the most difficult sector because of the problem of financing energy efficiency measures. Energy efficiency measures do pay off quite quickly, but if you're a householder and you're struggling to make ends meet, then you simply don't have cash to put into insulate your loft or to buy a more efficient boiler or more efficient appliances. So that's the most difficult sector. I mean, if you're industry, then your competitiveness depends on you being efficient. So industry is much more likely to sort itself out. But energy efficiency, we've had in the last 10 years or so, we've had a very big gain from LED lighting, which has reduced lighting demand by about 70 or 80%, simply by replacing the old type of lamps with the new ones. So that was an easy gain. Some of the other gains will be more difficult, like more efficient appliances like refrigerators, washing machines, tumble dryers, and so on. But the government can do things by setting standards, by not allowing inefficient appliances to be sold.
And you think, I was looking at a report from the USA talking about different sectors of their economy that are culprits around greenhouse gas emissions. Your thoughts on the different sectors and whether there should be higher clampdowns on certain sectors versus others once they've been identified?
Well, I think when you look at industry, the clear priority if you want to reduce emissions are the chemicals and iron and steel sectors, because iron and steel still uses coal. So we need to move to different processes for steel to reduce reliance on coal. Chemicals, we need to reduce reliance on hydrocarbons coming out of the ground, and we also need to be very efficient. But as I say, because energy is such a high proportion of the costs of such industries, that shouldn't be such a difficult thing to achieve, because it's in the interests of the companies to be efficient.
Well, we've been talking at length about the importance of 4IR or 4IR tech or artificial intelligence as in many ways propelling the change to accepting a new way of dealing with climate change, right? Do you agree with that, meaning that historically the argument has been most of the previous revolutions have come and they've galvanized economic activity, but they've come at a price. Could this be different now, where in fact 4IR could actually be the savior as opposed to be the problem maker?
Yes, I think that, I mean, the previous revolutions did bring big welfare benefits. They brought problems with it, and I'm sure there will be problems with this latest revolution, but there is no alternative. We have to tackle climate change, or we will cease to exist. We can't avoid it. Sooner or later, we have to tackle it.
And in terms of alternative resources, I mean, we've spoken at length about it today, but your take on what should we be looking for if we understand what is causing the problem? What are the type of things we should be looking for that will hopefully solve the problem?
Well, I think we need to, it will be a costly transition, so we have to be careful not to waste money. The more wisely we can spend our money, the quicker we can move. If we go for expensive solutions, that will only delay the reduction in emissions. So I think the priority has to be to do the cost-effective things now, and also to create options for the future, so that when we've exhausted the current best options, we've got something else to go to. So we need to invest in R&D and demonstration projects so that we have options in 10, 15 years time, as well as exploiting what we have now.
I cast my mind back to, many of these people out in the streets carrying posters saying like, the end of the world is near. Does that apply to what we're talking about now? How much time do we have?
I mean, it does seem that climate is moving very quickly now, so I wouldn't like to predict it, but from something that was decades away, it is now round the corner or happening now. So it's very difficult to predict, but it does seem that the situation is urgent. We have an emergency.
Well, there we are. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Steve Thomas. Appreciate it. And there you are. Your views certainly matter. And the hope clearly is for us and the world to be inspired by what you're saying and hopefully to take action. Well, talking about taking action, here's one for you. Would you consider buying an electric car as your next purchase? Answer that in the chat now. Let's have a quick look at how a UJ initiative changes the lives of a whole community with the use of clean energy before we take a look at the clean energy situation in South Africa.
I am Godfrey Nefolowodwe. I'm born here in 1985, 0831.
As a young man, Godfrey Nefolowodwe walked a 38-kilometer round trip to get to high school every day.
As a young man, when you travel from Matatan, you come here tired.
A journey that took about 3 hours each way. He usually left home in the dark, and it was almost dark by the time he returned. Home was the deeply rural village of Kwakani, a community of just 100 people in South Africa's far northeastern corner near the borders of Zimbabwe and Mozambique. When Godfrey, now 35, was at school, Kwakani had no running water, electricity, cell phone reception, or internet access. Unemployment was high. Only one person in the village was formally employed at the time, and money to buy diesel for the borehole pump or paraffin for the lamps in villagers' homes was scarce. For years, Kwakani's residents felt neglected by their local municipality, and the chance of change seemed slim.
Some they call it forgotten people. Job courses look like we are forgotten by our municipality and our government. Job course. Since I have been born, I never seen a civic delivery in this village.
But in 2014, the School of Electrical Engineering at the University of Johannesburg started to work with Kwakani to make essential improvements. A solar borehole pump was installed, as were solar-powered streetlights and indoor lamps. Large cold storage units, a creche, and a solar-powered bakery. Today, the bakery employs 8 residents and makes bread readily available to the village and other nearby communities. All of the technology installed in Kwakani is monitored remotely through an Internet of Things network that can be accessed and controlled from UJ. This helps to ensure that the interventions introduced in the village operate smoothly and sustainably from the present day well into the future. Fourth Industrial Revolution technology. At UJ, we're reimagining the future, and it's changing lives.
The Cloud Debate is a really important forum because it provides a catalyst for all of us in terms of thinking about solutions from a 4IR perspective, providing solutions for this really ugly monster that we call climate change, because we're not addressing it as the world historically. So something needs to be done very, very urgently. So with that in mind, what we're doing is speaking to thought leaders, activists who have a clear understanding of this, who are advocates for using 4IR as a key driver to provide solutions for climate change. One such person is Professor Larouche Dartibu, who holds a doctorate degree in mechanical engineering. He's also an associate professor in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering at UJ, which is the University of Johannesburg. Well, Prof. Dartibu, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ashraf.
Thank you. I'm particularly interested, first of all, from a UJ perspective, because that's where you sit, right? In terms of using or pushing 4IR as providing the solutions to solving, climate change problems.
Yes. At the moment, with the University of Johannesburg, the focus is really on trying to integrate technology in resolving some of the issues. And in this case, so one of the focus is on energy, because we are all fully aware that there is challenges, and at the moment, so most of the people are aware of the challenge that Eskom is facing with regard to energy. And at this stage, as the University of Johannesburg, so we are trying to develop technologies or build up science that can address such issues.
Do you get a sense, and I mean, this is a UJ question, but it's also a South African question, right? Do you get a sense that there's enough activism around the issues of addressing the issues of climate change? I mean, is there a big drive, or is it just isolated?
I don't think so. I think the difficulty for the government at the moment is the fact that there is only one entity that is supplying electricity, which is Eskom. So, and the Eskom at this stage is 90% almost. So the main supplier of electricity. And without the involvement of companies like Eskom, so it is going to be difficult so for the change that we all seek so to take place. Because at the moment you have the main actor, so who rely heavily on fossil fuel, for instance.
Yeah.
And so if that main actor does not shift his approach, it is going to be difficult for the rest of the society so to follow. So at this stage, so perhaps the plan, so the action could be so to look into So bringing in some other entities who at the first stage can start developing new technologies that can address, let's say, so issues related to the most vulnerable.
Okay. Yeah.
In this case, we can look at people who are looking for cheaper solution in terms of electricity, because ESCOM, so not only they are, at this stage, there is the issue of relying heavily on the fossil fuel, but there is also the other issue, which is the cost of electricity.
Okay.
So we can start by bringing in some other entities, so who can develop so the renewable energy source, and in terms, and the plan will be really to reduce the cost while addressing the issue of climate change.
And providing the much needed energy. And something that we touched on earlier on is whatever happens in the future, goodness, we cannot harm our world any longer. Too much emphasis in the past has been on providing solutions short term, but it's come at the cost of the world, and that's why we have these global crises right now, right? So, I get that part. So, with that in mind, the segue then to solar farms using 4IR technology. What's your understanding about utilizing solar farms, and to what degree are we doing it in South Africa?
In terms of the solar farm, there is solar panel in general that are being used to capture the sunlight coming from the sun. And at this stage, so there is a correlation between the direction of the solar panel and the amount of electricity that are being generated. And at this stage, what how 4IR can be integrated in that is so we can look at the possibility of controlling the direction of the solar panel and tracking down the direction of the position of the sun, and making sure that at any moment, depending on the position of the sun, so the direction of the panel is well aligned. So with
but how big a dent, and in this case dent is a positive point, how big a dent will that disrupt the existing energy supply? Meaning, are we talking about something that can radically change South Africa's power supply, or is it just a blip?
At this stage, and you have mentioned it earlier, I don't think we have a choice. Yeah. We have to move in the direction of saving the planet. Yeah. And because we have to move in that direction, it is not going to be a change that will have to take place immediately. So it has to be a gradual change. Hence, I mentioned earlier, so the fact that the transition can start with those who, at this stage, let's say, are more vulnerable, and then gradually we can now consider supplying electricity to a bigger group of the population. Okay. So, in terms of the technology for the solar farm, I think there is a lot of equipment in terms of control system that can be used to collect information and make sure that at any moment there is that alignment between the solar panel and the sun. And in that way we can maximize the energy generation.
What about wind farms then?
In terms of the wind farm, the approach can be similar because these days we know that the amount of electricity that is generated depends. I will just use an example on the length of the blade of a wind turbine. Okay. Yeah. And one of the issue that we can tackle is as you increase the blade length, so you produce more electricity. But then another issue can be as the length of the blade is longer, so the magnitude of vibration caused by the wind can also increase significantly. And one of the solution that we have researched on at UJ was to look into the possibility of building a wind turbine with an adjustable length. And in that way then, so we are in a position where we can say we make the blade longer when the wind speed is lower.
And I mean, do you get a sense, and I know you're at the research level yourself, but at some stage it goes to market, it goes to government, it goes to big business. But do you find, and it's just a personal thought, I mean, do you find or do you expect a pushback from others who don't want the status quo to change? Who understands that, hold it, there's more money in providing traditional energy supply. Yes, it may harm the planet. Yes, we'll modify. And then people like yourself and Eugene and everybody else comes up with these fancy ideas. And that's cool, but actually it's going to harm our business. I mean, do you see that sort of pushback?
That's definitely. Because I mentioned ESCOM earlier.
Yeah.
Because you have people who works in those companies. Yeah, they earn a living by working in those companies. And if we speak about technology, we speak about people who need to be retrained for those new technologies. And at the moment, as it sounds, most of those companies I'm mentioning here, ESCOM, have not initiated a huge shift towards renewable energy.
Because it's not in their interest.
Because it is not in their interest. So that is why at this stage we might consider a transition. So to say, can we start small and then gradually start affecting the change? Because the change must take place. Because ESCOM must meet the commitment, and the government as well must meet the commitment in terms of the greenhouse emission of carbon.
But it does suggest, therefore, and it may not be your direct field, but there needs to be a greater degree of activism, isn't it? Activism, lobbying, for the public to be more aware of the harm of traditional energy sources and why we need to embrace new things for the things we mentioned already, but also for, whether it's the ESCOMs of the world, certainly in the South African context, government needs to be completely on side with this. So, I mean, is there sufficient activism and lobbying around this issue?
I think there is, but for most people, what I sense is people have decided to carry on moving while the debate is taking place. Yeah, because we cannot really stop innovation, because we sense a resistance. So we can carry on with the innovation, we can carry on investigating possible solution, while the debate are taking place. Because the society as well, because of the change, so there is that resistance to say we are comfortable with the way things are running.
In an uncomfortable world,
yes. Perhaps the danger of what is coming is not really shown properly. And at this stage, we are at the point where we have to make a choice. So which is to say, there is these new technologies that are potentially could save the planet. So can we embrace this technology gradually? Can we then consider that for those people who are vulnerable, so to say the cost of electricity is very high, and at this stage they cannot cope with the cost of living, can we then gradually start to train people, let's say, who will be affected heavily by the shift towards renewable energy?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's been very informative talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.
You're certainly going to get everyone thinking. And I mean, that's really the point, isn't it? You've heard what has been discussed. The question is, how do you take this forward? How do you internalize it for yourself? Be it an academic, be it an activist, certainly being someone who cares deeply about the economies of the countries that you live in, but also at the same time deeply around protecting the climate, the countries that you live in and the entire planet, because the reality is, if you don't have a planet, well, you actually have very little else. What clean energy would you consider implementing in your hometown, household, and why? Well, share your thoughts with us in the comments online now. In our last segment today, Cloud Debate correspondent Louis Eckstein chats to Professor Ben Newell on how each of us can make an impact on the climate change agenda.
Our Cloud Debate deals with clean energy and the storage of that clean energy as a battery power, really. So it's this virtual circle where clean energy is generated by solar, wind, hydro, generation of power, and then it gets stored in these batteries, and the whole chain is then clean. No fossil fuels are contributing their negative effects in this scenario. Now, as a behavioral psychologist, you understand what drives people's behavior. Why do they do certain things? Why do they take certain actions? And my question to you now is, what role can the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, or what we like to call 4IR tech, such as mobile apps and instant communication and things like that, what sort of role can these technologies play in changing people's behavior positively so that they enact through their actions ways that can alleviate climate change?
I think there are multiple different ways in which these technologies might be able to help people. First and foremost is to make them aware of the different options that they might have available to them in terms of their energy delivery. So people can't start to make a more environmental choice or a more sustainable choice until they're aware of what those choices are. And by providing people the opportunity to make those choices, either via apps or giving them the information in some easily digestible format, that in and of itself hopefully will start to sway people's behavior. But over and above that, I think there's been a lot of work done over the last decade or so on how to set up what people talk about as a choice architecture. So how are these options presented to people in ways that might make them more likely to choose certain options over other ones? And the idea behind these is not that you're forcing people to make particular choices, but that you're perhaps gently nudging them, is the word that often gets used. And I think in energy choices, there's experiments showing that people who are presented with options where a more environmentally friendly, a green option is defaulted, so is already kind of pre-selected for them, then that might make it more likely for them to take it up. I think that it's important that if you do that kind of pre-selection, that there's also a transparency about it. Why is it that these options are being selected, and an explanation? And I think getting that, as I said, that understanding that those choices are out there, that understanding of why it is that this is a more environmentally friendly option, are all things that can start to initiate the conversation, to get people understanding that interaction between what they're doing and how that can have a positive impact on the planet.
I want to move on, if you don't mind, to incentivization. So we've got quite powerful technologies developed in South Africa, exported around the world now, to help people live a healthier lifestyle. So exercising, eating right, and it's extended to driving correctly as well, and things like that. So there's a huge incentive for you. You actually earn cash back, if you will, if you live a healthy lifestyle. And the medical insurance companies are paying out less in medical insurance as a result. Do you think that kind of incentivization from a psychological perspective could work in the topic of alleviating climate change?
I think it's a fascinating proposition, right? I mean, if you could go from having, as you say, the health insurance companies who are getting people to wear their wearable technologies and monitor their heart rates and then change their policy as a function, if that went to monitoring energy choices or climate-related environmental behaviors, and that had an impact, then I think that would be fascinating. I know that some financial institutions are looking at things like emissions trackers for your credit card, for example. So actually telling you what this purchase of this item is going to cost you in terms of emissions. Exactly how those calculations are being made and the degree to which people will trust the numbers that are coming back, I think is an important consideration. The other thing that I think from a psychological perspective, with all of these sort of tech interventions and possible uses, is the overcoming the tendency for people to be kind of motivated by these incentives initially, but for then that motivation to wear off, for people to become kind of bored. The first time you get your energy meter at home and you can switch things on and off and see how it changes the amount of energy that you're using, it's really exciting. Yeah. But then 3-4 months in, it's like, oh, it's changing a few cents an hour here and there, and I'm not really interested in it. So I think if you can get that kind of tech and that initial excitement to get people into a situation where they then have a behavior where they kind of set and forget. So I've reached the point where it's exciting to set my thermostat lower and see how much money I save. So I just do it, and then it's set, and then that's locked in. Those kinds of behaviors are easier than the everyday types of things that I need to get into. And for that, you need more of that shift towards making it a habitual behavior. So there's a longer take up time, especially if the existing behaviors are very much, are very long existing in the first place, well established. Yeah.
So I suppose, it's like, it's common sense probably that entrenched behavior are the difficult ones to change, especially probably as you get older. You get, obviously you've got more entrenched behaviors that are sort of programmed in. Have you noticed that the let's say the younger generation, let's say the digital generation, are they more prone to be persuaded to change their behavior to alleviate climate change?
I think that's a good question. There's certainly the younger generation are not having to overcome that initial question of, is this something I need to care about? They clearly realize that this is an issue, that this is a live issue for them more than anyone else. Whether they're then more willing to make the kind of sacrifices, even framing it as sacrifices is not a great way to put it. Changes to behavior that we think are going to be, or we know are going to be necessary. I think it depends on the type of behavior that you're trying to target. Energy type behaviors, use of public transport over personal transport, those kinds of things. I think they're also dependent on factors not just to do with age, but earning potential or. And again, that comes back to this issue of pushing it all onto the individual versus changing the system around them in such a way that it can facilitate these kinds of changes without it being pushed on. An interesting fact about carbon footprint calculators is that they were first developed by fossil fuel companies. And it was them that was sort of saying, we just provide the energy. You guys have to make a decision about how much of it you want to use. That's on you, not on us.
The technologies of communication, and I'm thinking about just a simple alert on your phone. I'm not thinking about a long article that you have to delve into. Just an alert on your phone. So you've done 7,800 steps today. That means you're going to get 50 points. You've used X. Fossil fuel versus Y clean energy, and you're going to get 25 points today. Do you think that there's ever going to be a time where that kind of level of instant, easy to digest information can work in the energy sector to change people's behaviors?
One of the challenges of getting people to adopt these kinds of behaviors is you don't get in your car, so you stand at the bus stop in the rain, and then you see all these other people driving past you in your car. Well, why am I suffering when they're not? So unless you have a system that has the right kind of incentive structure, the subsidies and whatever it is in there, that means that, I understand those people are in their car and they're staying dry, but they're losing out on something else.
They're being penalized and I'm being incentivized.
Yeah, maybe I get tax relief because I take the bus more often or something. It's something along those lines that, unfortunately, if we were all super altruists, then we wouldn't have to have that kind of mechanism in place. But something along those lines is gonna have to happen, and again, that comes from more of that institutional system level change, I think.
You mentioned something very interesting earlier, and that you believe, and I suppose it comes from your research and your experience and your knowledge in the area of behavioral psychology, that people have got wide capacity to understand things, actually. So even if they're given an avalanche of information, they do have the capacity to understand it. So do you think that that also accounts for understanding that if I do something as myself, it contributes, and if everybody does it, or a majority does it, then it has this sort of large impact that is required to effectively contribute to alleviating climate change? Do you think people have that capacity, and how can that capacity be unlocked, really, through incentivizing behaviors?
A student of mine worked on a nice paper where they looked at exactly that idea. They called it the collective aggregation effect, which is essentially what you described, that if you communicate to people, yeah, sure, if you watch an hour less TV or you turn your light off, it's only going to have this impact on emissions, but think of that times 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. This is what the impact will be. And intuitively, people can figure out that's there, but perhaps doing the calculation is a little bit hard. So just having it explicitly there in front of you, and then making the comparison, this is the same as whatever, reducing air travel by this amount.
Yeah, I suppose it's that when we the people kind of get together and we use political power to make changes in government, and that places pressure on organizations, legislation changes and all of those things, then contribute to those big impact things that will have a huge positive result in alleviating climate change. But it's got to, probably from a behavioral psychology level, it's got to start with someone, then it goes to a group, then from the group it goes to larger community, from the community it probably goes to society. Does that make sense? And can we as individuals sort of understand that process from a behavior perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I think as I was saying earlier about the types of behavior, the behaviors that we think of often are in terms of consumer choices or energy, whatever. But it's also voting or contacting your local representatives or making your voice heard in whatever platform you're given or you have the opportunity to do, to make it clear that those things are, to get that change, we do need to have sufficient numbers of people on board. Eventually, as you're sort of indicating, the governments will reach the point of saying, okay, well, if you don't get it by now, then you're going to have to get it. This is now the legislation. You're going to be forced to, you can only drive your car 3 days a week or whatever it might be. But that kind of more punitive and top-down approach is also likely to then potentially result in people not being very happy about it. And so if we can get to that point without having to enforce those kinds of punishments, then that would be a much better outcome for all.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. I think we're sort of reaching the end of our discussion now, but if there is anything that you'd like to perhaps just mention that I maybe didn't ask as a question, as a last opportunity to tell us what we should do.
Well, I don't know if to tell you what you should do, but one of the things that struck me when I was thinking about this, the role of technology and apps and getting people engaged in these things, is that if we could get to the point of being able to develop apps or things that people are interacting with in some technological way that are as addictive and compelling and all-encompassing as the social media companies seem to have figured out how to do by using psychology, that would be great. If instead of people were on social media, perhaps not being most productive, but were engaged in these, like you were saying, almost, having a competition with each other about who could be more environmentally friendly rather than other things that are not as useful, then that would be terrific. So any technological experts out there who want to create, the climate game that's going to get everyone engaged, I'd be very interested to hear from them.
That was a super interesting conversation with Professor Ben Newell, a behavioral psychologist from Sydney, Australia, and he's got some very interesting ideas for how to change people's behavior so that that behavior can be positive, net positive for climate change alleviation. And his best idea was creating a game that's fun to play so that you can beat your mates. And the result of this game is that I am more environmentally friendly than you.
And now for the question that can put you in line to win a 4IR tech hamper. Which professor discussed the psychology behind changing people's behavior to embrace climate change initiatives? Thank you so much for joining us today and for the great engagement on the various platforms, and make sure to join us on the 13th of July for the next edition in the 2022 Cloud Debate series, which will focus on recycling and deforestation. You can visit uj.ac.za/4IR to view this and other cloud debates and find out all you need to know about 4IR.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.